That was Dylan Fearon reporting. Newly named Amherst Pelham Regional Middle School Principal Dr. Letha Gayle-Brissett has now declined the position following a school committee meeting earlier in the week. At Tuesday's meeting, one mother spoke about the bullying her transgender child had endured at the middle school. She said that Brissett oversaw the restorative justice program at the school and that Brissett was her main point of contact when it came to the violent bullying and harassment her son experienced. She said Brissett's lack of understanding and knowledge about gender identity further exacerbated the harm done to her child.
I think this is the wrong choice. Everybody I know can grow and learn, but I think we need a leader right now for the school who's well-versed in supporting LGBTQ youth, well-versed in gender identity issues, and well-versed in gender-affirming practice. And in our experience, that was not Dr. Gayle-Brissett.
Dr. Gayle-Brissett spoke out after the family's comments, saying the allegations were false, and she believes it's an attempt to remove people of color from higher-up positions at the school.
It cannot be coincident that these allegations are emerging at a time when I was offered the position of interim principal. There have been whispers that some members in the middle school community are intent on removing people of color, especially black people, from leadership positions. It is not unreasonable to believe that these false claims are part of this agenda.
Brissett added that over the last decade, the middle school has struggled to sustain any form of principal leadership for an extended period of time. We did reach out to the Amherst School District for a comment. They confirmed Brissett turned down the position.